Welcome to our first week of exploring geography. So perhaps you're wondering to yourself, what is geography anyway? I have a couple working definitions here for you. We often hear of this split between physical geography and human geography. So physical geography focuses on how the Earth's physical processes work, mostly independently of humans. However, as well, how physical processes may affect humans and how humans affect these processes in return. So this is a very strong reciprocal relationship that we'll see come up again and again. Particularly here in human geography, we have the study of various aspects of human life that create distinctive landscapes and regions of the world, and how those landscapes and the environment reciprocally affect humans. So this give and take between humans and our environments, how we are constantly affecting our environments and how our environments affect us. And it's very important to remember that physical and human geography are often tightly linked. In fact, many would argue that they are inseparable, even though they are referred to differently. So what do geographers study? They study mainly spatial interaction and spatial distribution. So those are two key words for us this week. Interaction of space, we can think of how any sort of phenomena come together to be played out on land or on the landscapes. But also this would can include on water as well. So it's not just terrain, but any sort of social or political or physical space. And then distribution is quite simply how things are distributed, how they're placed, located, spread out. And so we can see examples of these in how and why people came to occupy a particular place. It's a very central theme in geography, how people use physical aspects of that place, whether it be climate, landforms, resources such as water or forest, and modify them to suit their needs, so including cities in today's day and age as well. How people may create environmental problems, a key thing in both urban and rural areas, and how people interact with other places, both far and near. So how we, in today's day and age, and in previous centuries, interact with places on the other side of the world. For instance, perhaps when you call an Amazon representative if you have a problem with your order, getting a representative who's stationed in South Africa as one brief example. So then we have this concept of the region, which is a unit of the Earth's surface that contains distinct patterns of physical features or distinct patterns of human development. So we'll look at a few examples after this, but this can be defined by vegetation, such as forest or chaparral in the Sierra Nevada foothills of California, for instance, architecture, culture, or history as well as climate and landscape. Very important distinctions that we'll be seeing regional climatic zones or regions, delineated according to criteria selected to facilitate study of patterns particular to an area. So we can think of how political regions are delineated. This very much facilitates study. And then regions may shift over time as an important point we need to keep in mind. We see that here, and geopolitical shifts, for instance, geopolitical regions have produced different regions over time. We can see in the red affiliated with Russia, green affiliated with Southwest Asia, the purple there affiliated with South Asia. These regional associations weren't always this way. They've shifted through times, nor were the nation-state borders anything similar to this in previous centuries. So very important to keep in mind when thinking about how regions can shift. And scale in regions. Scale is a key concept in geography. Here we're looking at the global scale, the level of geography that encompasses the entire world as a single unified area. We can see different regions within that mapped out in this map, predominant religions and belief systems. We'll take a look at that in this chapter as well. But within the world, we have world regional scale. So the regional scale of analysis that encompasses all the regions of the world. That's what this class is mainly focused on, this course that you have this semester. And here highlighted, which we'll focus on next week, is North America. And sometimes these world regions follow continental scales, such as Europe or Middle and South America, but sometimes they split continents, and we'll take a closer look at that as well. And at the local level, the local scale, we have the level of geography that describes the place where an individual lives or works, city, town, or even a rural area. Such as the outskirts of Kansas City here, or Long Beach down in Southern California. Either one of these could be considered a local scale, even though they greatly differ in landscape appearance. So what to remember about regions? Some things here important to keep in mind: that they contain distinct environmental or cultural patterns. That's what allows us to separate one region from another. No two regions are necessarily defined by the same set of attributes. These can vary highly around the world and from place to place. Regional definitions and territory included often change. This is very important to keep in mind in today's day and age, with rapid changes that take place, as well as more slow-scale changes in how this can appear on the landscape. And boundaries of regions are usually indistinct and hard to agree upon. So there's still regions of the world where there's boundary disputes between nations, such as India and China, India and Pakistan. And these can create significant issues for people and resources on the ground. Regions can vary greatly in size. And this highlights the importance of scale, which we looked at and will continue to. So there's about 5 main sections for each chapter that this book is divided into. So our first is environment in each chapter. It's important to consider the human impact on the biosphere. There's some key terms for our week. Anthropocene, the geologic epoch during which humans have had an overwhelming impact on the Earth's biosphere. This is what we are living in now. It's perhaps best exemplified by the 6th mass extinction that scientists are pegging on human activities. So the Anthropocene often has a quite heavy tone to it because of the pernicious or negative impacts that humans are causing on the biosphere. The biosphere is the entirety of Earth's integrated physical spheres, with humans and other impacts included as part of nature. So including the atmosphere, including the hydrosphere, including the lithosphere, all of these combined. So the ecological footprint is the amount of biologically productive land and sea area needed to sustain a person at the current average standard of living for a given population. So different populations, different cultures, different regions' ecological footprint can vary quite a lot based on their consumption patterns, based on their lifestyles, and we'll continue to look at this and even do a personal ecological footprint exercise in later units. And what this really highlights is the importance of understanding global climate change. Climate change can be a slow shift of climate patterns, which climate is just long-term weather. It's easy to keep in mind that way, due to general cooling or warming of the atmosphere. So we often hear of climate change used synonymously with global warming, but climate change can be a global cooling as well, and this has happened in the past. But right now we are certainly in a very severe global warming phase. The warming of the Earth's climate as atmospheric levels of greenhouse gases increase. Be a simple definition for global warming. And greenhouse gases, for instance, are carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, methane, which become harmful when released in excessive amounts. This is because the way that they trap heat towards the surface of the Earth in the atmosphere, and similar to being in a greenhouse on a warm or even a cool day, it's going to be warmer than outside because of its trapping light and heat inside of the greenhouse. And that's what's happening right now and creating massive changes on Earth. The drivers of global climate change are mostly electricity production, particularly from coal because of the high greenhouse gas emissions from burning coal to produce electricity. But yeah, excuse me, I said mostly electricity generation, but that should only be most, because certain forms of electricity generation do not put off greenhouse gases. For instance, nuclear, which has its other side effects, and for the most part, hydroelectric generation, besides the building of the dams, there's not a greenhouse gas emissions from hydroelectric dams. However, petroleum-based transportation, there's a very significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions and global warming from that, as well as industrial processes and consumer products. So our consumption patterns are a huge driver of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions currently. The heating and cooling of homes and businesses, large-scale raising of grazing animals, non-grazing animals as well. Yes, huge amounts of methane produced from the feces of cows in particular, but all livestock. We'll take a closer look at that in the chapters to come. And then we would be remiss to not speak of climate change and global warming as a result of deforestation as well. That's because forests take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, release oxygen, and they store carbon in their biomass. As more trees are cut down, the wood is used for fuel, more carbon enters the atmosphere and less is taken out, so less is stored. So this is a very significant impact on global warming. Loss of trees and other forest organisms produce as much as 30% of the buildup of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Use of fossil fuels accounts for the remaining 70%. So it puts in perspective there the two significant drivers. Here we see the countries most responsible for global warming on a total emission scale. This isn't per capita, so it's a little skewed, meaning it's not per person. And we'll continue to look at these numbers as we go on to these regions throughout the semester. This raises the importance of looking at vulnerability to climate change, how this varies region to region, country to country. Even within countries, there can be a big difference, depending on where you live and what the geography is around you. Vulnerability to climate change refers to a place's risk of suffering damage to human or natural systems as a result of such impacts as sea level rise, drought, flooding, or increased storm intensity, all of which we've seen very significantly in the last recent years in the US and in many other countries around the world. Vulnerability also takes into account exposure, the extent to which a place is exposed to climate change impacts, and how sensitive a place is to climate change impacts. So here we see a map of the most vulnerable in general. In particular, there are poor countries with low human development, large slums and low-lying coastal wetlands are least responsible for the greenhouse gases and have the least geopolitical power in these countries. So that brings up a very significant disparity and challenge that exists at addressing climate change globally. And also, critical importance is water in this climate change dynamic. We see national water footprints here, similar to ecological footprint. Water footprint is how many cubic meters per capita per year. And virtual water is the volume of water used to produce all that a person consumes in a year. So much more so than just the water we might drink or use for a shower or cook with. All of the products we consume entail use of water at some point, particularly crops, but also anything that's produced in an industrial factory. There's water used in those processes as well. So we can look at a water footprint on this note, the water used to meet a person's basic need. added to the person's annual water consumption. So the theme of water is central to global warming, and one that we'll continue to look at in each region that we go through around the world. Unfortunately, it's increasingly privatized, so owned by a particular person or entity. This can lead to unaffordable prices and even riots. Dirty water claims the lives of 6 million people each year, and 24,000 children under the age of 5 die each year from waterborne diseases, oftentimes from the diarrhea that results, not simply because of the disease itself. Diseases such as malaria and cholera can spread rapidly without adequate investment in clean, quality water distribution. This is an Aboriginal girl in Southwest Australia. And so we'll continue to look at all these themes as we work through these regions. The next section in each chapter is Globalization and Development. And so what is globalization? A simple working definition we can keep in mind is the growth of interregional and worldwide linkages and the changes these linkages are bringing about. Interregional linkages can refer to economic, political, and social connections between regions, whether they're contiguous or widely spread. And it's important to keep in mind that the flows between regions affect attitudes, values, culture, ethnicity, in addition to economics and politics. So Hollywood and the film industry is a great example of that, how it can affect attitudes and values and culture around the world or between regions. Economic crisis that began in 2007 negatively affected economies around the world, even though it started from the financial policies and practices within the US. And just a quick explanation of global economy there to keep in mind is that worldwide system in which goods, services, and labor are exchanged. So to measure economic development, on this note, we can look at gross domestic product, or the total market value of all goods and services. However, this can be a little bit contentious because it can include things such as medical services, tobacco sales, some sorts of conflicting values. And so a lot of geographers and social scientists in general come up with other ways of quantifying or measuring economic development in more fair and just ways. The gross national income is the total value of income in a country. Here we have some of those disadvantages of GDP, GNI per capita as a measurement of economic development. It obscures inequality because it's an average at the national scale. Only measures the formal economy. Women perform about 60% of all work done, but much of that is unpaid and in the informal economy, so it's a bit unjust in that sense. Does not take into account the expense that this income can have on environmental sustainability, human rights, and human well-being. So on that note, we can look at other measures, such as the Human Development Index, the HDI, evaluates a country's well-being by calculating the GNI adjusted for PPP, life expectancy, and educational attainment. As well, the Gender Equality Index is used, a composite measure reflecting the degree to which there is inequality in achievements between women and men in 3 dimensions: reproductive health, empowerment, and labor market. So another section of the book, each chapter, is power and politics. Key themes such as democratization, authoritarianism, the transition towards political systems guided by competitive elections, or the political system that subordinates individual freedom to the power of the state or elite, regional and local leaders. Oftentimes there can be blurred lines here. I think even within the case of the US, we can see forms of authoritarianism, and in other places, a classic authoritarian regime, one might think of China. However, there are forms of democratization in China as well. So it's neat to read between the lines with some of these aspects. Geopolitics, the strategies that countries use to ensure that their interests are served in relations to other countries. And it doesn't have to be just between countries. Oftentimes entities or international non-governmental organizations can be said to have their own geopolitics and their drive to preserve land for environmental organizations, for instance, or multinational corporations and their drive to obtain more rights for oil drilling, for instance. But geopolitics commonly brings into the conversation is the previous international relations that continue to affect the global scale, such as the Cold War, which was generally seen as a divide between communism and capitalism, or an ideology that calls on workers to unite to overthrow capitalism, establish an egalitarian society in which workers share what they produce, or capitalism as an economic system based on private ownership, means of production, distribution of goods, driven by profit motive, characterized by a competitive marketplace. So we'll see these concepts come up as we work through various regions. Next section in each chapter is urbanization, the process whereby cities and towns, suburbs grow as population shifts from rural to urban livelihoods. In the case of picture, in case of Phoenix here, you can see how quickly it outgrew its city borders. And population and gender is another section that we'll look at with themes such as women and education. Girls in developing countries, for instance, that get 7+ years of education marry later and have fewer children. Women and girls are more likely to invest in their families than men. And children of educated mothers are healthier, more likely to finish secondary school. So these are big themes that have an important effect on society and culture. And on that note, the socio-cultural issues section of each chapter, culture being a key concept. We can think of it as everything people use to live on Earth that is not directly a part of biological inheritance. There's many different definitions of culture, but it's important to keep in mind how it's adaptive and representative by a wide number of things, such as ideas, materials, methods, social arrangements that people have invented and passed on to subsequent generations. Think of heritage and tradition, or even on a practical note, such as methods of producing food and shelter. Culture includes language, music, tools and technology, belief systems, moral codes, gender roles. These are very important things in order to understand human society today. Key aspect of culture on that note is religion. Comprises the formal and informal institutions that embody value systems. Many include spiritual belief in a higher power, not all. Has often been used to wield power and can spread through trade contacts. We'll see that in many different regions that we look at this semester. And then, and last but not least, language. One of the most important criteria used in delineating cultural regions. See predominant languages there mapped out in, around the world. Geographic pattern of languages has continually shifted over time and will continue to as people interact through trade and migration. Very key themes within geography. English is the most important language of international trade, but Arabic, Spanish, Chinese, Hindi, and French are also widely used. So this concludes our mini lecture for this week, and I look forward to fielding and responding to your questions below and continuing our dialogue from there. Okay, thanks.